The hospital lobby was full of noise. It was a busy afternoon, and people sat in the waiting area hoping to see a doctor. Some were coughing, some were holding their heads in pain, and others just looked tired. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, their white coats swishing as they rushed from one patient to another. The sounds of ringing phones, footsteps, and voices filled the air. Everyone was busy with their own problems. Then the glass doors of the hospital slid open. An old man slowly walked in. He looked very weak. His clothes were old and torn. His face was pale and sweat covered his forehead. His hands clutched his chest as if he were in great pain. His legs wobbled and it seemed like he could fall at any moment. People in the lobby noticed him. A few gasped. Others looked away. But no one moved to help him. He took a deep breath and forced himself to walk toward the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses, looked up from her computer as the old man reached the counter. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Please? I need a doctor," he said, his voice shaking. His hands trembled as he held onto the desk for support. His eyes pleaded for help. The receptionist frowned. She glanced at his torn clothes and tired face. Then she sighed and muttered under her breath, "Another one who can't pay." She didn't call a doctor. She didn't offer a wheelchair. She just sat there waiting for him to leave. The old man's lips quivered. His breath was heavy. He tried again. "Please? I think I'm having a heart attack." Just then a doctor walked out of his office. He was dressed in a neat white coat, and a stethoscope hung around his neck. The old man turned to him and reached out a shaking hand. "Doctor, please help me. I can't breathe. My chest hurts." The doctor stopped and looked at him for a moment. His eyes were cold, without kindness or worry. He frowned and asked, "Do you have insurance? Do you have money to pay for the treatment?" The old man slowly shook his head. He was too weak to speak. His whole body was shaking. The doctor sighed and crossed his arms. "I'm sorry, but we can't help you. This is a private hospital. If you don't have money, you need to go to a government hospital." Tears welled up in the old man's eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest. His body curled up in pain. He gasped for air, but it was getting harder to breathe. The people in the lobby just watched. Some whispered to each other. Others pulled out their phones to record. But no one stepped forward to help. Then the glass doors slid open again. A tall man in a black jacket and jeans walked in. His steps were calm and steady. He looked around the room, scanning the faces, until his eyes landed on the old man lying on the floor. Keanu Reeves. Without a second thought, he rushed forward. He knelt beside the old man and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, sir. I'm here to help," he said, his voice steady and gentle. The old man looked up, his eyes filled with pain and fear. Keanu spoke softly, "Hold on, okay? I won't let anything happen to you." Then Keanu looked up at the people around him. "Someone call a nurse," he commanded. His voice was not loud, but it was strong and firm. For a moment, everyone just stared. They were too shocked to move. But then one person finally ran to find a nurse. The doctor who had refused to help earlier walked back into the lobby. He frowned when he saw Keanu kneeling beside the old man. "Sir," he said with irritation, "as I explained before, we cannot treat this man if he cannot pay." Keanu stood up. His eyes locked onto the doctor's. His gaze was sharp and serious. "Are you saying that money is more important than a human life?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with authority. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. "It's hospital policy. We don't provide charity," he said defensively. Keanu took a deep breath. He didn't want to argue, but he wasn't going to back down either. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Fine," he said. "How much will it cost to save this man's life?" The doctor blinked in surprise. The initial deposit is $5,000, he stammered. Without hesitation, Keanu took out a bundle of cash and handed it to him. "Here's $10,000. Make sure he gets the best treatment possible." The entire lobby went silent. The receptionist, the doctor, the nurses, and the patients all watched in shock. The doctor, looking flustered, nodded quickly. He turned to the nurses. "Take him to the emergency room. Now." The nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. They carefully lifted the old man and wheeled him away. Keanu followed them, making sure there were no more excuses or delays. As they reached the emergency room doors, the old man looked up at Keanu, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you. I don't even know your name," he whispered. Keanu smiled gently and squeezed his hand. "Don't worry about my name. Just focus on getting better." For the first time that day, the old man felt hope. Meanwhile, the people in the lobby were whispering. "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" one person asked. "Why would he help a stranger?" another wondered. Keanu didn't care about their whispers. His only concern was the old man's safety. A while later, the doctor returned, looking uneasy. "The man is stable for now," he said. "He might not have made it if treatment had been delayed." Keanu's face softened. "Then it's a good thing we didn't waste time, isn't it?" he said pointedly. The doctor nodded and walked away embarrassed. A nurse came up to Keanu and smiled. "The patient wants to see you," she said kindly. Keanu followed her to the recovery room. The old man was lying in bed, connected to machines, but he looked better. When he saw Keanu, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved my life," he said weakly. "I don't know how to repay you." Keanu shook his head. "You don't need to repay me," he said. "Helping others is the right thing to do." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "I used to be a teacher. I spent my life helping kids learn. But after I retired, I lost all my savings. I had no one to help me." Keanu listened closely, his face serious. "I came here hoping someone would help," the man continued. "But they only saw a poor old man. They didn't care if I lived or died." Keanu placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You are not alone anymore," he said firmly. "You spent your life helping others. Now it's time for someone to help you." The old man wiped his tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smiled. "Sometimes we just need to stand up for what's right. That's enough." And in that moment, the old man knew kindness still existed in the world. When the world turned away, Keanu's words were full of kindness and wisdom. His words made everyone stop and listen. It was as if his voice had the power to calm even the most chaotic of rooms. The old man, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, felt something in his heart. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he mattered. The kindness of the stranger, Keanu, was something he hadn't expected in such a cold place, like the hospital where he was being ignored. The hospital staff slowly started to notice what was happening. Some of them looked on with shame, realizing how poorly they had treated the old man earlier. Others whispered to each other, amazed by how humble and generous Keanu was. But Keanu didn't seem to care about the whispers or the stares. His focus remained entirely on the old man, who was now starting to feel cared for and valued. More and more hospital staff were drawn to the scene. They began to understand that this simple act of kindness was something they all needed to learn. But Keanu stayed focused on the man in front of him, making sure that he knew he wasn't alone. He had a way of making everyone else forget about the noise around them and focus on the important things: kindness, humanity, and love. Soon, the story of what Keanu had done spread outside the hospital. One of the hospital workers, who had been deeply moved by what she saw, secretly recorded parts of the interaction and shared it online. Before long, the video went viral. People all over the world were watching as Keanu's simple act of kindness spread like wildfire. His selflessness became a beacon of hope. Everyone praised him for his compassion, and many people condemned the hospital staff for ignoring the old man in the first place. The headlines were everywhere. Keanu Reeves saves elderly man ignored by hospital, and Hollywood stars humanity shines brighter than fame. But while everyone was talking about Keanu, he remained entirely unaware of the buzz. He wasn't interested in the fame or the media attention. All he cared about was making sure that the old man, who had been ignored for so long, was treated with the dignity he deserved. Back in the hospital room, the old man rested peacefully. The stress of the ordeal had lifted, and he finally felt calm. Keanu sat beside his bed, reading through the treatment plan provided by the doctors. As he flipped through the papers, he noticed that many of the tests and treatments that had been recommended were still pending. They all came with very high cost. Keanu didn't hesitate. He was used to paying for things, and this situation was no different. "I'll take care of it all," he said to the nurse who had approached him but seemed unsure about how to proceed. She looked at him with surprise and wonder. "Just make sure he gets everything he needs," Keanu added, his voice steady but full of care. The nurse, clearly moved by Keanu's actions, nodded and whispered, "You're an incredible person, sir. Not many would go to such lengths for a stranger." Keanu didn't respond with anything grand. He simply gave her a small nod and went back to the man's bedside, continuing to focus on him. Keanu's actions didn't stop there. He went to the billing office quietly, wanting to make sure that the old man's financial worries were taken care of. As he handed over the money to the receptionist, the woman who had originally ignored the old man's requests, she looked down in shame. "I'm sorry for how we treated him earlier," she admitted, her voice filled with regret. Keanu, ever humble, simply nodded and said, "It's not too late to change how you treat people." When Keanu walked back to the room, He found the doctor who had dismissed the old man earlier, standing awkwardly by the door. The doctor, his usual confidence gone, looked at Keanu with a subdued expression. "I owe you and that man an apology," the doctor said, his voice quiet. Keanu paused for a moment before replying, "It's not about me. Just remember that everyone deserves compassion, no matter their circumstances. That's what being a doctor is about." His words left the doctor speechless. He had no answer to that, but Keanu's gentle yet firm way of speaking made him realize the importance of kindness in every part of his job. The doctor would never forget the lesson he had just learned. As the days went on, the old man's health began to improve. He regained some of his strength, and for the first time in many years, a glimmer of hope appeared on his face. Keanu visited him daily, bringing small meals, chatting about life, books, and memories. Even though Keanu didn't ask for anything in return, his presence seemed to breathe new life into the old man. "You've not just saved my life," the old man said one morning, his voice steadier than before. "You've given me a reason to believe in humanity again." The staff at the hospital were inspired by what they had seen. Many of the nurses and doctors who had once ignored the less fortunate began to treat all patients with respect and care. It was as if Keanu's kindness had sparked a chain reaction, transforming the atmosphere of the hospital. One of the younger nurses, who had been there during the initial incident, confided in Keanu. "I've been working here for 2 years," she said, "and I've never seen anyone stand up for a patient like you did. You've reminded us why we chose this profession in the first place." Outside the hospital, the world continued to react to the viral story. People from all walks of life shared their own experiences, remembering times when they had been treated poorly because they didn't have enough money. Keanu's simple act of kindness had ignited many conversations about compassion, justice, and the responsibility people have toward one another. Charities and organizations started to reach out, offering support to the old man, hoping to help him rebuild his life. One charity even started a fundraising campaign to help him, and in just a few days they raised an overwhelming amount of money. Despite all the attention and offers, Keanu remained out of the spotlight. He declined all interviews and avoided discussing the incident. For him, it had never been about gaining recognition. He simply believed in doing what was right. One evening, a journalist finally caught up with him as he was leaving the hospital. "Why did you go to such lengths for a stranger?" the reporter asked. Keanu paused for a moment, then smiled softly. "Because kindness doesn't need a reason," he said simply before walking away, leaving the reporter stunned by the depth of his words. The old man, now aware of the attention his story had received, asked Keanu one day, "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Keanu smiled warmly and replied, "Because this isn't about me. It's about showing the world that one small act of kindness can make a big difference. You have your life ahead of you now. Live it fully, and maybe one day you'll pass this kindness forward." The old man's health continued to improve, and after a week he was able to leave his hospital bed and walk around with the help of a nurse. Keanu stayed by his side, making sure he felt supported every step of the way. On the day of his discharge, the hospital staff gathered in the lobby to say goodbye to the man who had unknowingly become the center of a story that had touched hearts worldwide. When the old man was wheeled out, he hesitated, looking at Keanu. "I don't know where to go," he admitted, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Keanu crouched beside him, his expression gentle yet firm. "You don't have to worry about that," Keanu reassured him. "I've arranged a temporary place for you to stay until we figure out something more permanent. You won't be alone in this." Tears filled the old man's eyes as he nodded in gratitude. He was overwhelmed by Keanu's unwavering kindness. As he was wheeled out of the hospital, the staff clapped softly. Many of them were inspired by what they had seen and were determined to be kinder in their own lives. The doctor who had once dismissed the old man stood silently in the corner, his head bowed in reflection, thinking deeply about the lessons he had learned. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man and his mysterious benefactor. Reporters tried to approach, but Keanu kept his focus on the old man, shielding him from the growing attention. "Let's get you somewhere peaceful," Keanu said, guiding the wheelchair through the crowd. The old man looked around in awe at the number of strangers cheering for him. For the first time in years he felt seen, valued, and cared for. Keanu escorted him to a modest, but comfortable apartment that he had arranged for the man. "It's not much," Keanu said, "but it's a start." The old man looked around the apartment, his heart swelling with gratitude. The fridge was stocked, the bed was made, and there was even a small stack of books by the window. Everything a person would need to begin again. "This is more than I could have ever dreamed of," the man whispered, his voice breaking. "How can I ever repay you?" Keanu smiled and placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "You already have," Keanu said softly, "by believing that things can get better." As the old man settled into his new home, Keanu took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. He knew the world would move on, and that his actions might be forgotten in time. But to Keanu that didn't matter. What mattered was that one person had been given a second chance at life. The old man had hope again, and through his story many others would find hope too. Days turned into weeks, and the old man began to rebuild his life. With Keanu's support, he reconnected with his former students, many of whom had grown up to be successful professionals. When they learned about their teacher's struggles and the kindness he had received, they came together to offer their help. One student, now a lawyer, helped solve the old man's financial issues, while another, a local business owner, offered him a job as a mentor for young employees. Slowly but surely the old man's life transformed. He began to volunteer at a local shelter, sharing his journey with those who had lost hope. He became a beacon of light for others, proving that no matter how hard life gets, kindness can make a difference. The story of the old man spread far and wide. People started talking about how society treats the less fortunate and began to question the way they treated others. Hospitals, workplaces, and even governments began to focus more on compassion and less on money. The old man's story touched lives and changed hearts. Through it all, Keanu stayed in the background, refusing any interviews or recognition. For him, it wasn't about the praise. It was about helping others, showing them that kindness could create ripples of change in the world. One evening, as the old man sat by the window in his new apartment, watching the sunset, he thought about the day he had walked into that hospital expecting nothing but rejection. Life had given him not just a second chance, but the chance to inspire others, all because one person had chosen to care. The old man smiled, feeling the weight of his hardships lift. He whispered to himself, "Kindness truly changes everything." He realized that sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could change the world. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.